The announcement of a 10-point ceasefire between Iran, Israel, and the United States brought an immediate collective exhale across the globe. After months of escalating tension, the terms seemed to offer a concrete pause to a conflict threatening to engulf the entire region. The architecture of this deal was credited to Pakistan. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif stepped up to the podium and publicly laid out the terms of the agreement his administration had brokered between the rival powers. Inside those terms was one specific, highly debated clause. Sharif explicitly stated that Lebanon was part of the ceasefire's protection zone. According to the draft, the skies over Beirut were supposed to go quiet. Washington quickly threw its weight behind the agreement. The Donald Trump administration championed the Pakistani-led mediation, presenting the deal to the public as a tangible step toward regional peace. But diplomatic celebrations rarely survive contact with the battlefield. Agreements typed out in Islamabad or praised in Washington hold zero weight if the opposing militaries on the ground refuse to honor the ink. Within hours of the announcement, the sky over Lebanon ripped open. Rather than a cessation of hostilities, Israeli jets executed a coordinated wave of airstrikes across the dense cityscape, shattering the supposed truce almost immediately. The bombardment left over 250 people dead. This was a direct, calculated military campaign that outright ignored the protection zone Pakistan had just finished announcing to the world. Which brings us to a stark contradiction. If the United States, Iran, and the brokering officials in Pakistan all formally agreed to a regional ceasefire, how does one party simply choose to continue the war on its own terms? The answer is that the paper agreement ignored the actual hierarchy of power in the Middle East. It assumed diplomatic protocol could restrain a military that operates on its own strategic timeline. In the aftermath of the strikes, Shehbaz Sharif posted urgent pleas for peace, urging all sides to honor the truce. Israel didn't even bother to formally reject his authority. They simply ignored him completely. To understand why, we have to look at the mechanics of mediator leverage. A successful mediator needs lines of severe economic or military threat connecting them to the warring parties. Think of the intense pressure a country like China could exert in negotiations. Pakistan holds none of those threat lines over Israel. They have no crushing economic sanctions to deploy, and no military threat capable of forcing compliance from a heavily armed, deeply entrenched defense force. In modern warfare, a mediator lacking systemic leverage is just a messenger. And the moment the message becomes inconvenient to a heavily armed actor, it gets thrown out. While strikes landed in Beirut, Washington's narrative underwent a swift transformation. Initial enthusiasm for the Pakistani draft was replaced by a restricted interpretation. The administration declared Lebanon was never part of the ceasefire, claiming Hezbollah's presence excluded the country. This directly contradicted their earlier praise of the Pakistani draft. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's unilateral military decision had forced the United States to retroactively rewrite its own public policy to match Israel's actions. In this specific diplomatic framework, the perceived global superpower isn't dictating the terms. The United States is operating purely as a reactionary force, adapting its narrative to cover the maneuvers of its regional ally. Iran responded with immediate hard power, ordering the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This vital choke point handles a massive portion of the world's oil supply. Shutting it down sends an economic shockwave, forcing a regional dispute onto global markets. Simultaneously, Hezbollah officially announced that the airstrikes nullified any truce they had agreed to respect. Within hours, they mobilized their forces and launched retaliatory rocket salvos straight across the border. Failing to honor that single diplomatic boundary in Lebanon acted as an immediate catalyst. It triggered a multi-front escalation that resurrected border artillery fire and choked off maritime trade routes in the span of a single afternoon. This leaves the scheduled peace summit in Islamabad completely paralyzed. The upcoming talks are technically still on the calendar, but the actual premise of the meeting is compromised before anyone even sits down. Every faction is now completely entrenched. Washington is publicly dismissing Iran's 10-point conditions as fabricated. Israel denies it was ever bound by the mediation to begin with, and the Iranian government is facing intense, fiery domestic pressure to reject any further compromise. The bare minimum level of trust required to exchange diplomatic notes has evaporated. You cannot negotiate a viable treaty when the primary actors are actively bombing and blockading each other during the drafting phase. Without a neutral power capable of enforcing the rules on everyone involved, this highly celebrated ceasefire was merely a brief illusion. It provided just enough time to reload, leaving the entire region standing closer to total war than they were before the ink was dry.